So, Billy, market was rocky last week, and some say that it was actually due to the October effect. So, basically, October was a month that investors tend to avoid the market because of what happened previously, like the Black Friday and Black Monday. But it's been disproven. This time around, we don't really see a clear direction on why the markets panicked. You spoke to some of the people in the market. What did they say?
I think there are a few reasons. Of course, first of all is the downgrades that were by the IMF. So it's the first downgrade since July 2016, so that's like quite a while ago, right? And the downgrade was cited, one of the reasons was because of the rising trade war between US and China, and that sort of play a part in this whole, the knee-jerk reaction that we see. Because if you remember previously, there's this rhetoric about how the trade war will affect the economy and all that, but US economy has continued to grow in a very good numbers, right? But right now we have the IMF coming out and say that the numbers are going to come down, right? So this is like, it's just a reaction that's taken. And then of course there is the bond yield, the spike in the bond yield, and that affects the market as well, because people are afraid, because if you remember that this year in February itself, there's also a similar sort of sell down in the market as well, which is because of the bond yield that has gone up. So we have reached a new high for 10-year Treasury yield, 3.1 plus in October 5th, so that's part of the trigger as well. But when talk to people, the main thing is really the downgrade by the IMF, because it's something that is new, something that is sort of re-enhance that belief that the trade war will actually affect the economy. Yeah.
Now, Billy, despite all these noises, we talk about IMF, we talk about federal US Treasury yield, right? Yeah. Despite all these noises, Fed is committed to raise rates.
Yes, that's right.
So, how would Asian markets take this? Are we resilient enough?
I think most of the belief is that the Asian market is resilient enough to withstand, even if as long as the Fed continue in this path that they have talked about, because it's a gradual pace that they are raising rates, right? But there are concerns that if the Fed will raise rates at a more aggressive manner, partly because of the inflation that gone up faster than expected, because of the trade war that helped to fuel the inflation, right? So in general, yes, the Asian market should be able to withstand this sort of panic, but there are a few things that could turn that around. For example, if US market were to see a collapse, that would definitely have a big impact on the Asian market. But overall, yeah, we should be able to go through it pretty smoothly, yes.
So, Billy, global risks aside, are people just worried about that there is no clarity coming out from our government before the announcement of Budget 2019?
I think if you look at the market last week, the reaction after the investors conference, I think worried is an understatement. I guess people are afraid to a certain extent, because you have a government that talks about sacrifices in the coming budget. I mean, it's fine to talk about that, but to talk about sacrifices to a group of investors, I mean, when I talk to people, that's the first thing that really turn them off to a certain extent, right? So most people really just want to wait until the budget to see what's going to happen, because right now you have come out and say you want to have new taxes, but you never elaborate on that. So there's a need for clarity. I think in my story I put in what Rafizi said on Twitter about capital gain tax and all that. So those are things that really scare the market. It's just not something that the market can jive with.
When we talked about capital gains and when we get more clarity from Budget 2019, right, do you think people will get calmer from that?
It depends on what comes out on Budget 2019 at the end of the day, right? But if you talk about capital gain tax, for example, it's not something that is that investors are looking forward to. If you look at US, they cut corporate taxes and stuff like that. So if here we talk about implementing capital gain, so capital gain tax, that would probably create a bit of uncertainty, but I would assume that the market would have priced that in by then.
Billy, we have been hearing a lot about socialist policies. Yeah. The government is giving pressure to telco companies to reduce charges. So, and then they have also terminate part of the MR2 package as well. How would the foreign investors take this kind of actions?
When I talk to them, there are a few things that they actually talk about, actually to put on hold some of the infrastructure project. But to a certain extent, it makes sense, right? There are ongoing allegations against former Prime Minister Najib Razak on some of the corruption. So it makes sense for the new government to come in and say, okay, we want to put a stop to this, to see whether it really going to benefit the community. That's one thing, right? But the message must be right, I guess. Right now you have even, for example, the telco, you have them coming out and say, you have to reduce prices. The intention is good. You say you want to double the speed and lower the price, but if you are pushing them to do it, like if you're forcing them to do it, and you're not letting the market to drive the prices and all that, then that is a concern for foreign investors or even local investors. People will be wondering, if I come into Malaysia, right? If I were to invest in Malaysia, what is the policy going to be like? Are they going to push us to give up our gain? Or at the end of the day, it's not just, it has to be a win-win situation, right? So the message has to be right, and I think right now the concern is that the way that the message is being sent across, it seems to be like a socialist policy. Yes, yeah.
So Billy, overall, are investors still bullish about the Malaysian market? Like when we talked about the local market, domestic market, are they still bullish about that?
And talk to them, if you talk about the long term, probably 5-10 years sort of view, Malaysian market is definitely good because we have natural resources, we have oil and all that, right? That's one. But if you talk about the medium to short term, then that's a bit of concern because you have all these uncertainties that are there, right? You don't know what the government is trying to do. You're not sure what kind of taxes are coming in. In terms of when you talk about bullish or not, I think to a certain sectors, yes, probably exporters, for example. The top glove makers are still very good because of the weakened ringgit and all that. But in general, people are cautious. The tone is that it's cautious because you just don't know where to go to, right? You don't know where the government is heading to.
For more on the stories, pick up a copy of The Edge Weekly at all good newsstands.